What if the man sleeping behind your local church was once a decorated war hero, erased by the very country he swore to protect? Marcus Reed served his nation with honor. Then he vanished, not in battle, but in the system, beaten, framed, forgotten, until one young attorney uncovered the buried truth and sparked a reckoning no one saw coming. This isn't just a story of injustice. It's a tribute to every veteran whose sacrifice faded into silence. If you've ever worn the uniform or loved someone who has, you won't want to miss what happens next. Tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? And how does this story speak to you? And if this moved you, tap that subscribe so you never miss the stories that matter most. The morning sun bathed the streets of downtown Charlotte, North Carolina, in a soft golden hue. It was just past 7 o'clock a.m., and most people were still tucked in warm homes or bustling into offices, coffee in hand. But for Marcus Reed, every day began the same way, quiet, invisible. At 64, his frame was lean from years of walking alleyways and sleeping on concrete. His face bore the weathered lines of both age and bad. A heavy-duty military backpack, faded and fraying at the edges, sagged from his shoulders. Inside it were a few canned goods, a worn Bible, and a folded American flag. He moved quietly between dumpsters behind St. Mary's Church, his unofficial shelter for the past 8 months. The staff knew he slept there, but they'd never asked him to leave. That small mercy, that quiet dignity, meant more to him than words could say. "Morning, Sergeant," Marcus whispered, placing a half-eaten sandwich near the alley. A stray dog, Mao Borani, one ear torn, one leg limping, crawled out from under a pallet and sniffed the offering. Marcus gave a faint smile, watching the animal eat with gratitude only the forgotten could understand. He didn't mind being invisible. Invisibility was safer than attention. Attention brought questions, and Marcus had too many secrets stitched into the fabric of his past. By early afternoon, he'd gathered enough recyclables to trade for a bottle of water and a protein bar. He headed to Mac's Market, a small corner store run by a gruff man named Travis Bodine, who never hid his disdain for the homeless. Inside the store, Travis was shouting into his phone. "I told you, I'll have the money Friday. It's only Tuesday," he barked, slamming the phone down as Marcus approached. Marcus placed a dollar bill and a few coins on the counter. "Water," he said softly, voice raspy from disuse. Travis glanced at the money, then at Marcus. "Prices went up," he said curtly. "That ain't enough. Try somewhere else." "It's the same as yesterday," Marcus replied. "Well, today's not yesterday," Travis snapped, "and I'm not running a charity." When Marcus reached to take his money back, Travis grabbed his wrist. "You think you can just come in here stinking up my store?" he hissed. "Let go," Marcus said, his tone calm, but his eyes sharp, alert. A flicker of something old, something trained, passed over his face, but Travis didn't notice. He shoved Marcus backward into a shelf of potato chips. A racial slur followed, loud, venomous. Marcus stood still, didn't move, didn't raise a hand. Travis reached for his phone. "I'm calling the cops. This guy just threatened to burn the place down." And within minutes, sirens wailed. And just like that, Marcus Reed, a man who once carried secrets for his country, became another statistic in a system built to forget him. The police cruiser screeched to a halt outside Mac's Market, red and blue lights slicing through the midday calm. 3 officers stepped out with the brisk efficiency of men used to being obeyed. Sergeant Paul Griggs, Officer Dan Mallory, and rookie cop Luis Ortega. Griggs was the kind of cop who spoke like a drill sergeant and looked at everyone like they were lying. His chest puffed, his jaw clenched, and his eyes flicked toward the figure sitting on the bench outside the store. Calm, still, hands visible. "That him?" Griggs barked, already approaching. Travis Bodine came out of the store, wiping his hands on his apron. "Yeah, that's him. Came in yelling, tried to jump the counter. I was scared for my life." Marcus didn't look up. His eyes were fixed on the sidewalk. His hands rested quietly on his knees. He didn't speak. Griggs stepped in close, towering over him. "On your feet, now." Marcus stood slowly. His bones ached from nights on concrete, but he moved with a strange kind of dignity, a kind that made the rookie Ortega pause. "I didn't," Marcus began. "Shut up," Griggs snapped. "Hands behind your back." Officer Mallory circled behind and cuffed Marcus with unnecessary force. The older man winced as the cold steel bit into his wrists. "Got a weapon?" Griggs asked. "No." "Don't lie to me, old man." They forced Marcus to the ground, even though he hadn't resisted. His temple struck the pavement with a sickening crack. Blood trickled into his eye, but he didn't cry out. Across the street, a young woman had begun recording on her phone. "He didn't do anything," she yelled. Officer Mallory marched over and slapped the phone from her hand. It clattered to the ground and shattered. "Interfering with an active investigation," he said coldly. "You want to be next?" Inside the patrol car, Marcus sat silently as they drove to the precinct. Griggs glanced at him through the rearview mirror. "You know," he said with a smirk, "I've seen your type before. Think you're smarter than the system, but it always wins." Marcus didn't reply. Instead, he closed his eyes and whispered something beneath his breath. "What's that?" Griggs barked. "You giving orders to your imaginary platoon?" But Marcus wasn't talking to anyone. He was remembering orders he had once given in a language of code and silence, remembering men who had trusted him with their lives. At the station, he was processed like any other suspect. Mugshot, fingerprints, personal belongings placed in a plastic bag. When Mallory and Griggs entered the evidence room, they brought his old military backpack with them. "Let's make it stick," Griggs said, pulling out a small knife from his own pocket. He wiped it clean and dropped it into Marcus's bag. "Got pills?" he asked Mallory. "Got a bottle from lockup," Mallory replied, pulling an unlabeled prescription bottle from his jacket. He planted it in a side pocket. "Nice. Suspect became hostile, concealed weapon, controlled substances. Classic," Griggs dictated as Mallory filled out the report. And just like that, Marcus Reed became what the system always wanted him to be, another violent vagrant with a record. Not a war hero, not a man with stories worth listening to, just a file number, waiting to be forgotten. The fluorescent lights in the precinct's booking area buzzed overhead, casting a sterile glow on the scuffed linoleum floor. Marcus sat on a cold metal bench, his hands cuffed tightly behind his back. The room smelled of stale coffee and disinfectant, a scent that did little to mask the underlying tension. Sergeant Paul Griggs stood nearby, filling out paperwork with a practiced hand. Officer Dan Mallory leaned against the wall, arms crossed, his eyes fixed on Marcus with a mixture of disdain and curiosity. Rookie Officer Luis Ortega sat at a desk, typing up the incident report, his fingers hesitating over the keys as he glanced at Marcus. "Name?" Ortega asked, his voice uncertain. "Marcus Reed," came the quiet reply. "Date of birth? May 14th, 1961. Ortega paused, his brow furrowing. "You served in the military?" Marcus nodded. "Yes, U.S. Army Special Forces." Griggs snorted. "Yeah, and I'm the Queen of England." Marcus didn't respond. He stared straight ahead, his gaze unwavering. Ortega continued, "Any prior arrests?" "No," Marcus said. Griggs stepped forward, slamming a folder onto the desk. "Well, congratulations, Reed. Today's your lucky day." He opened the folder, revealing photos of the knife and pill bottle allegedly found in Marcus's backpack. "Possession of a concealed weapon and controlled substances," Griggs declared. "You're looking at some serious time." Marcus's jaw tightened. "Those aren't mine." Griggs leaned in close, his breath hot and sour. "Sure they're not. Just like you didn't threaten that store owner." "I didn't," Marcus insisted. Griggs straightened up, turning to Mallory. "Get him processed." Mallory approached, unlocking the cuffs and leading Marcus to the fingerprint station. As Marcus pressed his fingers onto the ink pad, he glanced at Ortega. "You're new here, Marcus. Marcus said. Ortega nodded. "Don't let them make you into something you're not," Marcus advised. Ortega looked away, uncomfortable. After the fingerprints were taken, Marcus was led to a holding cell. The door clanged shut behind him, the sound echoing through the corridor. He sat on the narrow bench, the thin mattress offering little comfort. He leaned back against the wall, closing his eyes. Memories flooded his mind. The heat of the desert sun, the sound of gunfire, the faces of comrades lost in battle. He remembered the mission that had ended his career, The orders he refused to follow, the cover-up he couldn't abide. He had thought he could disappear, live out his days in anonymity. But now the past had caught up with him. In the adjacent room, Ortega sat at his desk, staring at the report on his screen. Something didn't sit right. He opened a new tab and began searching for information on Marcus Reed. What he found surprised him. Commendations, medals, a distinguished service record. The man in the holding cell was a decorated war hero. Ortega stood up, the chair scraping against the floor. He walked over to Griggs, who was sipping coffee and chatting with Mallory. "Sergeant, I think we need to take another look at this case," Ortega said. Griggs raised an eyebrow. "Why's that?" "Marcus Reed is a decorated veteran. His record doesn't match the charges." Griggs's expression darkened. "Are you questioning my report, rookie?" "I'm just saying we should be thorough," Ortega replied. Griggs slammed his coffee cup down. "Listen, kid, you do your job and I'll do mine." Ortega nodded, retreating to his desk. But the seed of doubt had been planted. Back in the holding cell, Marcus opened his eyes, sensing a shift in the air. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing: he wouldn't go down without a fight. The holding cell was cold, its concrete bench offering little comfort. Marcus sat with his back against the wall, his eyes closed, as memories from his past played vividly in his mind. He remembered the sweltering heat of the desert, the deafening sound of gunfire, and the faces of comrades lost in battle. He recalled the mission that ended his career, the orders he refused to follow, the cover-up he couldn't abide. A sudden clatter jolted him back to the present. The cell door creaked open, and a young woman stepped in, her eyes scanning the room until they settled on Marcus. "Mr. Reed?" she asked, her voice firm yet compassionate. He nodded slowly, studying her. "I'm Elena Morales, a public defender." She introduced herself, extending a hand. Marcus hesitated before shaking it, his grip firm despite the chains that bound him. "I've been assigned to your case," she continued, taking a seat across from him. "I've reviewed the charges, and something doesn't add up." Marcus raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "The evidence against you seems manufactured," Elena said carefully. "And your military record? It's impeccable." He looked away, the weight of years of silence pressing down on him. "I need to know everything," Elena pressed gently. "If we're going to fight this, I need the truth." Marcus sighed, the sound heavy with resignation. "It's a long story," he began. "I'm listening," Elena replied, her gaze unwavering. He took a deep breath and began to recount his tale, the missions, the betrayal, the years spent in the shadows. As he spoke, Elena listened intently, her expression a mix of shock and determination. When he finished, she sat in silence for a moment, processing the gravity of his words. "This changes everything," she finally said. "We need to bring this to light." Marcus looked at her, hope flickering in his eyes for the first time in years. "Let's get to work," Elena said, standing up. "We have a fight ahead of us." As she left the cell, Marcus leaned back against the wall, a sense of purpose returning to him. The battle wasn't over yet. The holding cell was cold, its concrete bench offering little comfort. Marcus sat with his back against the wall, his eyes closed, as memories from his past played vividly in his mind. He remembered the sweltering heat of the desert, the deafening sound of gunfire, and the faces of comrades lost in battle. He recalled the mission that ended his career, the orders he refused to follow, the cover-up he couldn't abide. A sudden clatter jolted him back to the present. The cell door creaked open and a young woman stepped in, her eyes scanning the room until they settled on Marcus. "Mr. Reed?" she asked, her voice firm yet compassionate. He nodded slowly, studying her. "I'm Elena Morales, a public defender." She introduced herself, extending a hand. Marcus hesitated before shaking it, his grip firm despite the chains that bound him. "I've been assigned to your case," she continued, taking a seat across from him. "I've reviewed the charges, and something doesn't add up." Marcus raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "The evidence against you seems manufactured," Elena said carefully. "And your military record? It's impeccable." He looked away, the weight of years of silence pressing down on him. "I need to know everything," Elena pressed gently. "If we're going to fight this, I need the truth." Marcus sighed, the sound heavy with resignation. "It's a long story," he began. "I'm listening." Elena replied, her gaze unwavering. He took a deep breath and began to recount his tale. The missions, the betrayal, the years spent in the shadows. As he spoke, Elena listened intently, her expression a mix of shock and determination. When he finished, she sat in silence for a moment, processing the gravity of his words. "This changes everything," she finally said. "We need to bring this to light." Marcus looked at her, hope flickering in his eyes for the first time in years. "Let's get to work," Elena said, standing up. "We have a fight ahead of us." As she left the cell, Marcus leaned back against the wall, a sense of purpose returning to him. The battle wasn't over yet. The courtroom was a stark contrast to the chaos of the streets. Its walls, lined with dark wood panelings, seemed to absorb the tension that hung in the air. Marcus sat at the defendant's table, his posture erect, eyes forward, embodying the discipline instilled in him during his years of service. Elena Morales, seated beside him, shuffled through a stack of papers. Her brow was furrowed, lips pressed into a thin line. She had spent countless hours sifting through Marcus's military records, police reports, and any piece of evidence that could shed light on the truth. The prosecution presented their case with confidence, painting Marcus as a volatile individual, prone to violence. They highlighted the knife and pills found in his possession, the alleged threats made to the store owner, and his prior altercation with law enforcement. Elena rose to address the court. Her voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed the fire within. "Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the man before you is not the person the prosecution describes. Marcus Reed is a decorated veteran who served this country with honor. The evidence against him is not only circumstantial, but, we believe, fabricated." She proceeded to present Marcus's military records, highlighting his commendations and the honorable discharge he received. She introduced character witnesses, former comrades who spoke of his integrity, his leadership, and his unwavering commitment to justice. Then came the pivotal moment. Elena called Officer Luis Ortega to the stand. The young officer, visibly nervous, recounted the events leading to Marcus's arrest. He spoke of the discrepancies he noticed, the pressure he felt from his superiors, and the internal conflict that had plagued him since that day. "I believe the evidence was planted," Ortega admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't have the courage to speak up then, but I can't stay silent any longer." Gasps echoed through the courtroom. The judge called for order, banging his gavel to quell the commotion. The prosecution scrambled to counter the revelation, but the damage was done. The seed of doubt had been planted, and it grew rapidly in the minds of the jurors. As the trial progressed, more inconsistencies in the prosecution's case came to light. Witnesses recanted statements, and evidence was called into question. Elena's relentless pursuit of the truth began to unravel the web of lies that had ensnared Marcus. Throughout it all, Marcus remained stoic. But inside, a storm raged. Memories of his service, the betrayal he felt, and the years spent in obscurity weighed heavily on him. Yet, amidst the turmoil, a flicker of hope emerged, a belief that justice might finally prevail. The chapter closes with the jury retiring to deliberate, leaving the courtroom in a tense silence. Marcus and Elena exchange a glance, a silent acknowledgement of the journey they have undertaken and the uncertain path that lies ahead. The morning sun filtered softly through the stained glass windows of the courthouse, casting muted patterns across the marble floor. Inside the courtroom, a heavy silence clung to the air. Every seat was filled, veterans in crisp uniforms, reporters clutching notepads, and ordinary citizens who had followed the case of Marcus Reed with growing interest and outrage. At the defense table, Marcus sat with his shoulders squared, though his hands trembled slightly beneath the table. Dressed in a plain dark suit borrowed from a local shelter outreach program, he looked every bit the man who had been broken but refused to stay shattered. Elena Morales sat beside him, calm and resolute. She could feel Marcus's tension in every breath, but she also knew this moment was bigger than either of them. Judge Robert Thompson entered, his presence commanding immediate respect. He adjusted his glasses and looked out over the courtroom. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, voice gravelly but clear, "have you reached a verdict?" The foreman, a woman in her 60s with silver hair tied in a neat bun, stood slowly and unfolded a slip of paper. "We have, Your Honor." "Please read the verdict." In the matter of the state of California versus Marcus Reed on the charge of assault, we find the defendant not guilty. On the charge of resisting arrest, we find the defendant not guilty. On the charges of possession of a controlled substance and concealed weapon, both counts, not guilty. The silence shattered. A soft gasp escaped from somewhere in the gallery, quickly followed by the sound of quiet sobbing. Elena placed a steady hand on Marcus's back, feeling the relief crash through him like a wave. His head bowed as a tear slipped down his cheek, not from weakness, but from the unbearable weight of vindication. Judge Thompson nodded solemnly. This court thanks the jury for its service. Mr. Reed, you are free to go. Court is adjourned. The gavel fell with finality. Outside, the courthouse steps were packed with supporters. Veterans stood shoulder to shoulder saluting as Marcus descended the stairs. Members of the community clapped, cheered, and chanted his name. News cameras flashed, capturing the moment when justice finally acknowledged the man it had tried so long to forget. Marcus stepped to the microphones. He hesitated, then spoke, his voice steady, deep, and filled with restrained emotion. I never asked to be a symbol. I didn't want to be the face of a broken system. All I wanted was a bottle of water and a safe place to sleep. But the moment I was thrown to the ground, bleeding on that sidewalk, I knew I was no longer invisible. Not because anyone saw me, but because they wanted me gone. He looked across the crowd, locking eyes with a young man in a wheelchair holding a folded American flag. This verdict isn't just mine. It belongs to every veteran who was left behind. Every black man treated like a threat before he ever opened his mouth. Every homeless person seen as disposable. Today you saw me, and I'll make damn sure you don't forget. Applause roared. Elena stepped forward and added, this case revealed more than misconduct. It exposed a pattern. But sunlight is the best disinfectant. We're not done. We're just getting started. As the crowd dispersed, Marcus and Elena stood quietly at the base of the stairs. The fight had taken months, years really, but for the first time, Marcus felt something deeper than anger or fear. He felt free, not just from the false charges, but from the weight of silence, the years of invisibility, and the scars that had once marked him as forgotten. Later that evening, Marcus returned to the veteran shelter, not as an inmate, but as a guest of honor. He sat with other former soldiers, passing around a battered photograph of his old unit. They spoke in hushed tones, swapping stories about loss and survival, about wounds that never fully healed. A younger veteran asked, how did you hold on after all that? Marcus leaned back, his eyes distant. You remember who you are, even when the world forgets. You hold tight to the truth, and one day, just maybe, it sets you free. The room fell into a thoughtful silence. Then someone whispered, welcome home, Marcus. And for the first time in a long time, he believed it. The weeks that followed the trial were filled with a strange, unfamiliar stillness. After months of noise, legal battles, press conferences, threats, whispers, Marcus Reed found himself surrounded by silence. Not the kind he had known sleeping behind dumpsters or in alleyways, where silence was just a pause before danger. No, this silence was different. It was peace. For the first time in years, Marcus had a clean bed in a small studio apartment donated through a local veterans nonprofit. It wasn't much, just a twin mattress, a hot plate, a battered couch, but to Marcus, it felt like a castle. Every corner of the space whispered dignity. He took his time hanging up 2 items, a framed photo of his old unit and the letter from the Department of Defense that formally overturned his dishonorable discharge. Honorable with distinction, it read. Elena Morales visited weekly, often bringing groceries and updates from the Veterans Legal Alliance. But she wasn't the only one keeping Marcus grounded. Every Sunday, he'd walk Bravo, his 3-legged mutt rescued from a shelter, to the small park on 7th and Main, where community members now gathered for what had become known as Veterans Hour. At first, it was just a few older men, quiet, weathered, withdrawn. But word spread. Soon, young veterans started showing up too, some fresh out of service, others struggling with housing or PTSD. Marcus didn't lead like a preacher. He didn't command like a sergeant. He just listened. One evening, as the sun dipped low over the skyline, a young Marine named Tyler approached him. Barely 24, Tyler looked like he hadn't slept in days. "How do you do it?" he asked. "How do you stay angry and hopeful at the same time?" Marcus took a long breath, kneeling beside Bravo. "I don't," he answered. "The anger burns itself out. But hope? Hope is like this dog. Even with 3 legs, he keeps moving. That's all we can do. Keep moving." Tyler nodded slowly and something shifted in his eyes. Back at the community center, Elena was busy expanding what started as a small legal defense fund into a full nonprofit, the Honor Project, focused on defending veterans unjustly accused, targeted, or neglected by the very systems they'd once served. She asked Marcus if he'd consider joining as an advisor. "Advisor?" he laughed. "I don't even own a suit." Elena smiled. "You don't need a suit. You have something better. Lived truth. And people listen to you, Marcus. You give them something to believe in." It took time, but Marcus agreed. And when he finally stood in front of a crowd at the Honor Project's first public forum, he didn't speak from notes. He spoke from his soul. "I was erased," he told them. "Not just from military records, not just from society, but from memory. People walked past me like I wasn't there. That's a special kind of pain, to be invisible in the country you once risked your life to defend. But this," he held up the restored discharge paper, "this isn't justice. It's just a beginning. Justice is when every homeless vet is housed, when every black veteran is treated with respect, when no man is thrown away because his truth makes powerful people uncomfortable." The room erupted in applause. Some cried, some just stood in silence, letting the weight of his words settle. The months turned to a year, and Marcus Reed became more than a name in the news. He became a voice, a mentor, a symbol of what happens when people fight not just for survival, but for each other. He worked with local precincts, helping to create new training programs around de-escalation, veteran mental health, and cultural competency. He visited high schools and juvenile centers, sharing his story not to shame but to awaken. And always, always, he returned to the park, to the people. One chilly November morning, as golden leaves danced in the breeze, Elena handed him a small envelope. "From Washington," she said. Marcus opened it slowly. Inside was a formal invitation. "The White House requests your presence at the National Veterans Justice Reform Summit." The morning sun filtered gently through the stained glass windows of St. Luke's Community Center, where a new mural had just been unveiled. Painted across one long exterior wall, it showed a veteran standing tall in a tattered uniform, half his body fading into shadow, the other half radiant in sunlight. Visible at last. Below it, a quote from Marcus Reed read, "Silence erases, but truth restores." Inside, Marcus stood near the back of the crowded hall, listening as Elena Morales took the podium. "Today," she said, her voice echoing through the hall, "we celebrate not just the survival of one man, but the resilience of a movement." The Honor Project began with a single voice refusing to be silenced. That voice was Marcus Reed's. The crowd applauded. Some stood. Veterans saluted. Marcus shifted uncomfortably, still unused to recognition, but Elena's hand on his shoulder grounded him. "They're not applauding the man," she whispered. "They're applauding what he stands for." After the ceremony, as the guests mingled and volunteers served coffee and pastries, a group of young interns from local universities approached Marcus. They'd been researching veteran affairs and wrongful convictions for their theses. One of them, a young woman named Kayla with a notepad full of highlights, asked a question that stopped him cold. "If the system hadn't come after you, do you think any of this would have happened?" Marcus paused. "I've thought about that," he said slowly. "Most days I wish it never had. But the truth is, pain uncovered something I didn't know I had left. Purpose. I was just surviving before. Now I get to build something." He looked around the room. Survivors, fighters, believers. A community rising from the margins to the center of the conversation. Back at the Honor Project's modest office on Maple Street, the work continued. Files piled on desks, intake interviews filled the calendar, and Marcus, officially titled Director of Veteran Outreach, spent his mornings reviewing new cases. Many of them echoed his own story. Planted evidence, false testimony, mental health ignored, homelessness criminalized. Each file was a person, each person a universe of pain and potential. Aaliyah, now in her final year of law school, had become one of the project's fiercest legal researchers. She worked side by side with Elena and Marcus, bringing precision and fire to every case she touched. Her bond with her father had deepened over the months, not through grand speeches, but through small rituals, shared lunches, walks with Bravo, quiet evenings spent combing through files, sometimes laughing, sometimes crying, always healing. One chilly afternoon, a letter arrived from a small town in Nebraska. A retired Army officer had read about Marcus and reached out with a story. A friend, also dishonorably discharged after blowing the whistle on a fraudulent arms deal in 1999, had disappeared shortly after release. No follow-up, no trace. He included an old photo, grainy and creased, but Marcus recognized the man's eyes instantly. "Another ghost," he whispered. That evening, Marcus called a meeting with Elena and Aaliyah. "We thought this was about Bay City, maybe about a few bad officers. But it's bigger. It's older. There's a pattern, years long, a shadow network of silence around whistleblowers in uniform." Elena nodded. "Then we expand. Research, interviews, subpoenas, if needed." Aaliyah's eyes lit up. "We build a database, timeline everything, track patterns. This isn't just defense work anymore. It's historical justice." And so the Legacy Project was born, a branch of the Honor Project dedicated to uncovering the buried stories of silenced veterans, those discredited, disappeared, or discarded for telling inconvenient truths. It would be messy, slow, and dangerous. But Marcus didn't flinch. "You can't heal a wound you don't acknowledge," he told a group of community leaders. "We're going to make sure the country sees every scar it gave us." Media attention returned. Not the chaotic frenzy of the trial, but a steady drumbeat of coverage. Documentarians came calling. University researchers offered fellowships. A senator introduced a bill inspired by the Honor Project's work, proposing a national task force to investigate cases of veteran retaliation. Through it all, Marcus remained centered, not in fame, but in service. One night, as he sat on his porch, sipping sweet tea and rubbing Bravo's ears, Aaliyah joined him. She handed him a worn notebook, his old military journal, now preserved and digitized. "I scanned every page," she said. "We're archiving it as part of the National Veteran Testimony Library. Your story will be taught in schools one day." Marcus chuckled. "Not sure kids want to read about some grumpy old soldier." "You're not just a soldier," she said softly. "You're the reason some of us still believe justice is possible." He didn't reply, just smiled. The stars twinkled above them, quiet and eternal. In the distance, a train whistle echoed, familiar, haunting, and full of motion. Marcus Reed was no longer running from his past. He was building the future.